Good evening. We welcome you to tonight's debate sponsored by the Lackawanna County League of Women Voters and the Political Science Department of the University of Scranton. My name is Patty Fowler, and I'm the League's current president. The Lackawanna County League of Women Voters is nonpartisan, which means that we do not support or oppose any political party or candidate. Our mission of the League of Women Voters is to promote political responsibility through the informed and active participation by citizens in their government. We encourage you to join the League. Membership information can be found in your program, or you can go to our website printed in your program at www.lwvlackawanna.org. We are an all-volunteer organization. Please support our work by making a donation on your way out. Donations help us cover the costs, including taping, so that the debates can be viewed by a wider audience. ECTV is taping tonight's debate. Tape debate will be available on YouTube and via links from our website tomorrow. This is not a live broadcast. However, ECTV will air the program on Comcast 19 local TV. Please check the ECTV schedule. A link can be found in your program. Every candidate tonight signed a debate agreement that included our audiovisual policy as follows. No part of any authorized or unauthorized recording of this debate may be used or distributed by any person, candidate, campaign, or political group for any purpose whatsoever. You may provide a link to the ECTV LWV video on your campaign website. Unauthorized recording is not allowed. To that end, we ask that you please silence and put away your phones and any other devices. The most important event is Election Day, Tuesday, November 6th. Don't forget to vote. A sample ballot can be found on the Lackawanna County election website. Then join us for election returns via live broadcast from ECTV. An interesting discussion about the elections will start prior to the closing of the polls. The program host will be Andrea Lewine. Also, tomorrow night, there will be a debate in the Brennan Hall for the Pennsylvania Senate 22nd District at 7 o'clock. Tonight's debate is between candidates of the 112th State House District. Our moderator is Jean Harris and will serve as tonight's debate. Dr. Harris is presently on the faculty of the University of Scranton Political Science Department and Women's Studies. In addition, she is coordinator of Ready to Run Northeastern Pennsylvania. She's currently on the board of the League of Women Voters of Lackawanna County and has been past president. Jean Harris.
Good evening and welcome to the university and the joint effort of the League of Women Voters of Lackawanna County and the Political Science Department here at the university. How we will proceed. So I will introduce each candidate with a brief bio that they have shared with us. Then I'll ask the candidates questions that were developed by the League of Women Voters. The candidates have not seen the questions yet. They will both get the same questions. They will have 2 minutes to answer each question. Any time not used is gone. We don't save up any time, so if they don't use the whole 2 minutes, they just lose that time. Denise Norberg in the front row will hold up a sign when there's 30 seconds left in their answer time, and then a stop. We ask that they stop. When the stop sign goes up, they can finish their sentence, but if they go on too long, I will interrupt them. Each candidate also has the opportunity to have 4 30-second rebuttals if they so choose, and they just need to flag me so that I know that they want to have a rebuttal. At the end of the questioning, the candidates will have 2 minutes each to do a closing statement. Between now and the closing statement, we ask that the audience keep their cell phones off and don't respond, don't clap, don't applause, don't give any kind of response so that we can get through as many questions as possible. Then at the end of the closing statements, that's the time that you can show support of your candidates. We drew straws before we began, and actually an X on a little piece of paper. And Mr. Lemoncelli will answer the first question first, and then we will rotate. So Mr. Mullins will answer the second question first, and we'll continue in that rotation. We also drew for who will give their closing statement first, and Mr. Mullins will give his closing statement first. So with that, we will go to the bios. So this evening we have the 2 candidates who are running for the State House of Representatives for the 112th District. Ernest Lemoncelli was born in Scranton and currently resides in the borough of Einan, Pennsylvania. He's a graduate of Scranton Prep and holds a BS in elementary education psychology from Bloomsburg University. Mr. Lemoncelli first ran for public office in 2016 as a candidate for the state representative in the 112th District. He is a member of several civic organizations. He's active in the Einan Sturgis Hose Company No. 3, holding the position of safety officer. He is currently a member of the Einan Archibald Lions Club and the Archibald Borough Monument Park Committee. Mr. Lemoncelli is past president, former treasurer, and previously held the position of business development manager of Delta Pi Alumni Association for Bloomsburg University. The candidate is currently co-owner of Easy Cruise and Travel, a travel agency in partnership with his wife. He previously worked in industrial electronics sales and management, responsible for a 7-state territory. Mr. Lemoncelli and his wife, Beatriz, have 5 children: Marina, Eric, Elliot, Francisco, and Frederico. Next to him is Mr. Kyle Mullins. Mr. Mullins resides in Peckville, Pennsylvania, along with his wife Lauren and son Connor James. He is a 2003 graduate of Valley View High School and received a BS in political science from Westchester University in 2007. This is Mr. Mullins' first time running as a candidate in a general election, having won the nomination in the 2018 primary for state representative. He is a member of several civic organizations, including the Amber Alert Missing Persons Task Force, the Friendly Sons of St. Patrick of Lackawanna County, as well as the Friendly Sons Parade Day Association. Mr. Mullins' career in state government began in 2007 with the position of research analyst for the Senate Democratic Research Office. He also has served as legislative assistant to Senator Mike Stack, and most recently legislative director to Senator John Blake. So those are the 2 candidates that will be talking with us this evening. And so now we will go to the first question for Mr. Lemoncelli. Please share with us your top 3 priorities for legislative action, and include in your answer why these 3 priorities are important, what resources will be needed to bring them to fruition, and what obstacles lie in the way of implementing these priorities. So 3 top priorities, why they're important, how you're going to resource them, and what obstacles lie in the way. Mr. Lemoncelli.
The first priority, I believe, would be to move school property tax from our properties to sales tax and to income tax. I have had a number of people that I've knocked on their doors and a number of people that I've spoken to that are having a hard time with covering that property tax. We have increased property tax since 1990%, when in fact weekly wage has only increased 80%. I don't think it's sustainable. The House Bill 76, Senate Bill 76 was up for a vote, and it was not passed. That would be a first priority. Another priority would be to fund school security and provide the kind of security now that our schools, that our children should have. There are a number of issues around that security: mental health, gun control, a lot of things that we've talked about for decades, but I think we need to do something now before some maniac shows up at one of our schools. And we already know how to do that. We protect our Lackawanna County Courthouse with metal detectors, one entrance, one point of entry, and with the armed guards at that entrance. The third would be to fund the opioid crisis, to fund the officers that are frontline and the nurses, and to put together a task force that would develop programs to help the people that are addicted to get off and stay off.
Thank you very much. Same question to Mr. Mullins.
Thank you very much, and I echo Mr. Lemoncelli's appreciation to the League of Women Voters for hosting us and for everyone here tonight. I very much believe we need property tax reform, and that would be something that I would get right to work, folks. We have a crisis on our hands. That is, it is a crushing burden on seniors on fixed income, on families just starting out. However, I do not believe that we should do it on the backs of our school children's education or on the backs of income and sales tax payers. So what I believe my solution to this problem would be to focus on primary homesteads, not the millionaire's vacation home in the Poconos, but focus it where the pain truly exists. I mentioned the quality of education funding. I believe more of the public education subsidy should be flowing through the state's fair education funding formula, because I don't believe that one child's education is any more or less valuable than the next, depending on where they're in school. I think we should define school and workplace bullying. It is currently not a defined offense in Pennsylvania, and I think we should penalize it. And thirdly, I believe we should pass and get right to a good government package, which includes the ending of per diems without receipts that lawmakers avail themselves of, and ending the state vehicle lease program, and and certainly last but not least, we must end gerrymandering, which is the political and partisan drawing of our districts. I think it's better when when voters are picking their politicians, not the other way around. Thank you.
Thank you. The second question will start with Mr. Mullins. And this deals with the size of our state General Assembly, the state legislature. Pennsylvania has 203 members in its state house and 50 state senators. This is the largest full-time legislature in the United States. Pennsylvania legislators' base salary is more than $87,000 per year. Only California taxpayers pay their state legislators more than Pennsylvania taxpayers pay theirs. So the question is, do you support a constitutional amendment to reduce the size of the legislature? And please explain your position.
I do support that. I believe the House of Representatives is too large, and I would support a proposal that did not make it across the goal line in this last legislative session to reduce that number to 151. I believe the Senate is right-sized as it relates to ensuring adequate access to its state senators, but I do believe the State House could afford some trimming. And we will be, it is a constitutional amendment process, so it takes 2 successive sessions. They dropped the ball on this one this last time around, and that's why I'd like to be sent to Harrisburg to advocate for that proposal.
Thank you. Mr. Lemoncelli, the same question. Do you support a constitutional amendment to reduce the size of the state legislature? And please explain your position.
I absolutely support reducing the size of the legislature. If Texas were a country, they would be the 20th size economy in the world. And they have a part-time legislature. They meet every 2 years for 5 months, and they pay their legislators $7,200 a year. Quite a difference. There's absolutely no reason why we have such a big legislature. Its cost is enormous, and not only is there a large number of legislators, the support staff is around 3,000 people in Harrisburg. It's absolutely a stunning size for us to pay for. I also favor term limits. I think it's one of the only ways we're going to stop the things that go on with politicians only seeking to gain re-election. And I would definitely support that, and would argue strongly for that in Harrisburg.
Thank you. Next question stays on the size of the state legislature, but here it's more the dollar cost to us. And Mr. Lemoncelli will answer this first. As noted in the previous question, Pennsylvania legislators' base salary is more than $87,000 per year. the median household income in Pennsylvania in 2016 was about $55,000. And median household income is the total income brought in by all members of the household who are 15 years of age or older. In addition to their salary, Pennsylvania legislators also receive numerous benefits, including per diems with no need to document expenses, substantial pensions, and lifetime health care after serving 8 years in the Senate or 10 years in the House. So while the debate on a constitutional amendment to cut the size of the General Assembly continues, what specific legislation would you advocate to reduce the cost of the General Assembly? Mr. Lemoncelli.
Article 2, paragraph 8 of the Pennsylvania Constitution says that the members of the General Assembly shall receive such a salary and mileage for regular and special sessions fixed by law and no other compensation whatsoever. I find it hard to believe that we have pensions of $250,000 going to a former Senator Mello, and that the benefits are so vastly better than what the average citizen can have. We have a pension problem in this state, and as a representative in Harrisburg, I will refuse a taxpayer-funded pension, and I would ask if you would do that as well. I would like to find out more about this constitutional paragraph, to find out how they, I haven't read everything there is to know about this paragraph or what applies to it, but I'd like to find out how they skirted that issue, because this specifically says you get paid for your salary and expenses, and that's it. Per diems, I do not intend to use per diems whatsoever. I've been in business and in management for years. We've used expense reports and with receipts. If you don't have receipts, you don't get paid. Plain and simple. And another thing I would address is gifts. No gifts, period. You're paid quite a bit of money. You don't have to take a gift of travel or even a cup of coffee. And anyone that works for me will be under the same rules.
Thank you. Mr. Mullins?
Thank you very much. In addition to, of course, I mentioned ending the state vehicle lease program and the per diems paid to lawmakers that don't require receipts. We should absolutely eliminate legislators' cost of living adjustments. We should consolidate the support staffs within the four caucuses to ensure that we're not doubling or tripling or quadrupling duplicate efforts. I will accept a pension as part of my employment and work hard to earn that and the trust of voters every single day. I think it is I think we demonize those with a pension, or demonize those with a respectable retirement security or program. The state of Pennsylvania twice now has put itself on a pension repayment plan, paying for past market downturns and past mistakes by governors and legislatures of both parties. So during both of those repayment plans that I mentioned, to bring both pension systems back to solvency, both times it was the workers who ended up having to contribute more for a somewhat reduced benefit. That's important to remember, that it was the workers with each passage of those reforms asked to do more, including the most recent one. We hear about how the state pension system should be converted to a 401k defined contribution system. They did that. The legislature did that, and then it became law. There's a hybrid pension system now in Pennsylvania. Again, both times with workers putting up more.
Thank you. We're going to turn now to a rebuttal. Sure, 30-second.
Just quickly, my opponent mentions car leases for legislators.
The microphone again?
Sorry. My opponent mentions the car leases for legislators. Currently, there was 42 vehicles leased for $7,200 a year, which is $603 a month. And October 1st, Associated Press reports that the House voted 140 to 44 to end that benefit for legislators. So that's already in process. The interesting thing about the article says that the House Republicans are the only one of 4 caucuses that previously did away with the leases for their members.
Thank you. Did you also want to rebuttal? No. Okay, thanks. So now we're going to move on to redistricting, and Mr. Mullins will answer this one first. Do you support reforming our congressional and state legislative redistricting process to implement an independent citizens redistricting commission that would take the process out of the control of elected politicians? And please explain your position.
Yes, without a doubt, I would support that. And in fact, one of the first pieces of legislation that I worked on in my prior role as Senator Blake's legislative director was an independent redistricting commission to do just that, to take these very critical decisions that the state makes every year following the census to redraw its political boundaries. I believe that independent commission should be charged with not only drawing the state legislative and senatorial district boundaries, but also the congressional lines as well.
Thank you. Mr. Lemoncelli?
The question is always answered that we should have an independent commission. There is no such thing as an independent commission. One only has to look at Facebook to see how much bias is among the population. I don't care if you put legislators on there or individuals, everyone has bias. The current situation with the redraw of the lines was, I think, unfortunate because it happened during the time when candidates were getting signatures to get on the ballot, and the district changed right under them. The other thing is that the state constitution says that it is the responsibility of the legislature to draw those lines, not the Supreme Court. I think by drawing them, by having the court draw those lines, I believe that was unconstitutional, and I'm surprised it wasn't heard in the federal Supreme Court. I think we could do a better job of it, but I think we have to be smart about it. The fact of the matter is the majority in the House and in the Senate draws the lines. If you don't like that, you have to change the Constitution. You can't just say, I'm going to have a law and I'm going to do it differently. We have to follow the law. The law says it's their responsibility. If you don't like it, you have to change the law. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question deals with leadership in the House, the State House, and Mr. Lemoncelli will answer this first. It has been said that Harrisburg is the place where legislation goes to die. In the last session, numerous bipartisan, popularly supported bills died without getting to the House floor for full consideration and a vote. Following the November 6th election, members of the Pennsylvania House will elect their speaker for the next session. The speaker has an outsized role in determining what bills come to the floor for a vote. So the question is, what should be the criteria upon which the House selects the next speaker so that the will of the people is considered above partisan politics? Mr. Lemoncelli.
Well, if you want to have the will of the people considered above partisan politics, you have to pick someone that's not partisan. And I don't know if that's possible. The fact of the matter is term limits would help tremendously in removing a lot of the partisanship. If you're not a slave to being reelected, you can do what the people need to get done. You're not going to be there for 30 years or 40 years. You don't have to worry about it. But what you should do is actually not take care of yourself, but take care of the people. And I think term limits would help enforce that in the legislature and throughout our government.
Thank you. Mr. Mullins, the question is, what should be the criterion upon which the House selects the next speaker so that the will of the people is considered above partisan politics?
Sure, that's a good question because it deals with procedure, the in and out, the day in and day out procedure that the average voter or citizen isn't privy to that goes on in the House or the Senate floor. The Speaker of the House maintains order and decorum from the rostrum, from the dais, and I believe should be evaluated in advance of his or her re-election or selection as Speaker on how they conducted themselves in the prior session. Did they conduct themselves with as little partisan bent as possible, or was that speakership used as a bludgeon against all minority parliamentary efforts or consideration of bills and amendments? Same thing over in the Senate side. I would say should be applied to and analyzed for the President pro tempore of the Senate. It is for you mentioned a number of proposals that died on the vine before the legislature left town for this session. So every bill that has been introduced is in effect dead. It will require reintroduction, short of some grand plan to return to Harrisburg in the next few weeks. Every bill is dead, including one of the most shameful displays of inaction, and that was without passing the protections for victims of clergy sex abuse. I didn't think that was something that we would leave shamefully on the table, but we did, and it's with a heavy heart that I say it will be another one of the things that I will work on with vigor when I get there.
Thank you. We're going to talk a little bit now about election procedures. In Pennsylvania is one of only 13 states that uses a closed primary. In a closed primary, registered voters can participate in their own party's primary election to select candidates. For people registered in a third party, a party other than the Democratic or Republican Party, or registered to vote without party affiliation, they cannot participate in a primary in Pennsylvania. This means approximately 1/3 of registered voters cannot vote in primary elections. Current leadership, bipartisan leadership in government are calling for change to open Pennsylvania's primaries. So the question, which Mr. Mullins will answer first, do you support opening Pennsylvania's primary to independent and third-party registered voters? Why or why not?
I wholeheartedly support opening our primary system to third-party voters. Our democracy works better when more people are participating. I had it going through this process for the first time. It's amazing the number of people who wish they could sign my petition or could vote for me or participate in the primary, and they just couldn't because of the way we have it set up here in Pennsylvania. And likewise, I'm sure there's plenty of Democrats who wish they could sign my opponent's petition. But it all gets back to the fact that we're stronger when more people are welcome to participate. And I also don't believe that the future voter, present and future voter profile fits neatly into only Republican or Democrat. I think we should certainly let them know that there's room for them, their voice at the table and in our election process, and as such, they should have the opportunity to participate, along with a host of other election improvements like same-day registration and early voting. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lemoncelli, do you support opening Pennsylvania's primary to independent and third-party registered voters? Why or why not?
I do not. We have two-party system, and by opening it to third parties, you're basically giving up your, lack of a better word, sovereignty of your organization. In this district, we're 70% Democrat. If you have a situation where a number of people change to independent, then you may never have a Republican on the ticket again. I think it's a good system to have the two-party system, and indeed, if the parties are large enough, there could be 3 or 4 parties on the ballot. So I don't support opening it wide open like that. I think we have to be very careful with our voting because there's the possibility of, for instance, everyone wants to, or a lot of times you get a suggestion to do it on the internet. I think that would be a disaster. Experian can't even protect your financial information, so I'd stay away from that completely. But no, I think the parties have the right to choose their own leadership, their own candidates, and it's unfortunate that there's not more participation with more parties.
Thank you. We'll talk a little bit about campaign finance now, and Mr. Lemoncelli will answer this first. Obviously, campaigns are very expensive. Pennsylvania is one of only a few states that do not have campaign contribution limits. That means that people and groups can give unlimited amounts of money to candidates running for Pennsylvania state and local government offices. Once elected, legislators have to devote a great deal of time to raising funds if they want to be reelected. Many constituents believe that instead of listening to them, their elected officials focus more on their large campaign donors. So the question is, what reforms to Pennsylvania's campaign finance system will you advocate for if elected?
I think it would be very interesting, and I don't know that it would fly, but I think it would be very interesting to limit the amount of money you could spend as a campaign. But I don't think that's going to work. Limiting the amount of donations may help, but indeed you're still going to have multiple PACs formed and special interests that actually funnel money where they want to funnel it. Again, if you want to take some of the money out of politics, put term limits in there. The PACs and the special interests can only afford to put up money just so often, and I think if you have term limits, you're going to have less influence from the special interests. I have taken no special interest money at all in this campaign, so that's one way of solving that problem. Just stay away from it. On the other hand, and I'm not impugning the character of my opponent, but his reports show that he has a lot of special interest money, 94% of it from out of the district. I have, in the past, run as an unknown and never before as a candidate, and no one raises that kind of money without having a political connection on the inside. So if special interests are funneling money to candidates, they will certainly have access at best, or at least. I think you need to have a term limit, and I think that would help tremendously with getting the PACs and the other special interests out of the system.
Thank you. The same question to you, Mr. Mullins. What reforms to Pennsylvania's campaign finance system will you advocate for if elected?
Sure. Elections cost money to run, and you need to, and I am absolutely so proud of the number of individuals. 75% of my contributors were individuals. The individuals and the organizations and causes that have supported my campaign. My judgment is clear, and my vote is not for sale. I know my opponent mentioned my fundraising, and I find it ironic that his fundraising mailer that went out goes through everything that's wrong with me, and then at the end of it asks for money, and at the very end of it reminds the would-be donor that Pennsylvania law allows unlimited individual and PAC and special interest contributions. So he's absolutely right. Pennsylvania law does not limit those amounts. So I would absolutely favor greater transparency efforts in our campaign finance reporting and limits to those that are reasonable limits. So thank you.
Thank you. Your second 30-second rebuttal.
I just want to be clear that I'm not impugning his character or implying that his vote is for sale. I'm implying that money in politics is an influencer, and it guarantees access. And again, I think term limits would help, and along with term limits, maybe some form of public financing rather than having to go asking for people to give you money.
Thank you. The next question deals with a living wage, and Mr. Mullins will answer this first. As of January 2018, there are 29 states with a minimum wage higher than the federal minimum of $7.25 an hour. Pennsylvania is alone among the mid-Atlantic states in not raising the $7.25 hourly minimum wage since it was adopted in 2009. The annual earnings for full-time minimum wage worker is $15,080 at the current Pennsylvania minimum wage. Full-time work means working 2,080 hours each year, which is 40 hours each week. The federal government's poverty threshold for a one-person family in 2018 is $12,140. For a family of two, the poverty threshold is $16,460. And again, if you work full-time on minimum wage, you earn $15,080. So please share with us your position and the rationale for it with regard to changing the Pennsylvania minimum wage.
Sure, I've been on record supporting, if we could ever find consensus to it, to a $15 an hour minimum wage. I recognize the fight that would, the hill that would have to climb in the state legislature, but I certainly do and will work for and advocate for a meaningful increase to ensure our workers don't have to choose between 2 and 3 jobs and spending time with their family and spending it on diapers and daycare. We need to provide a respectable wage and certainly join the other states that have increased that.
Thank you. Mr. Lemoncelli, the same question. Please share with us your position and the rationale for it with regard to Pennsylvania's minimum wage.
Independent Finance Office Director Matthew Natel said we would lose 33,000 jobs in the state by going to a $15 minimum wage. Big headline was Amazon went to $15 minimum wage. But if you read farther than the headline, they took away bonuses and they took away incentives. And so many people now have a $15 minimum wage and are going to make less money than they did before. If we stick to free market principles, which have brought us to the lowest national unemployment in 49 years, workers will have more opportunities and pressure will be to increase wages at the employer level. A phased increase is much more preferable than a $15 knee-jerk reaction. Doubling the minimum wage will hurt small businesses. There's very few businesses that can absorb a doubling of their payroll. And so what happens is people will work less hours or they will have less jobs. Artificially high wages cause businesses to do business in other ways. That's why you see, instead of a young man or a young woman behind the counter at McDonald's, now you have a screen where you go and press buttons and order it yourself. So it's a sword that can really cut into the economy if we don't do that correctly. I think we can raise it gradually, but not as a doubling of the wage.
Thank you. We're going to talk now about funding for education. Pennsylvania's Constitution requires the General Assembly to, and I quote, to provide for the maintenance and support of a thorough and efficient system of public education for all Pennsylvania school children. According to the Public Interest Law Center, Pennsylvania has the most inequitable school funding system in the country. Communities with lower property values have 33% less to spend on students than communities with higher property values. So, Mr. Lemoncelli, this goes to you first. If elected, what will you advocate for in order to address the inequitable school funding that exists in our state currently?
Well, school funding this year, in this budget has increased significantly and even has $70 million in it for school security. Again, going back to property tax, and sales tax. Sales tax was instituted in the early 50s to be dedicated to education. It's a consistent revenue, and it moves up over time with price increases. I think that HB 76 and Senate Bill 76 was an answer to that. However, it was not passed. That was a bill that was bipartisan and had a lot of private sector involvement, organizations and individuals involved in that. We have a new school funding formula that if everything went through that funding formula, we would lose a lot of money in this area. For instance, Dunmore would lose $50,000, Mid-Valley $101, Valley View $88, Scranton School District $874,000. That's the new formula. The new formula, however, if it's applied only to the new funds, that would be helpful. But if you apply it to all the funding, then we're going to see, our area will see decreases in funding, and that's not going to be good for anybody here.
Thank you. The same question to Mr. Mullins. If elected, what will you advocate for in order to address the inequitable school funding that exists in our state?
Certainly. One of the great achievements, we have to remember there are some achievements sometimes that come out of Harrisburg, and that was the school funding formula. As my opponent mentioned, it only applies to incremental new dollars over the baseline. So it will take a good number of years to get to full equity on the conditions set in that formula. I'm in agreement here with my opponent that you should send all of the funding through the formula. It would certainly harm a number of our districts, but I believe if we sent somewhat more along with held school districts harmless, we could certainly make an impact. Also, we need to get back generally to a conversation in Harrisburg about how well and sufficiently we fund our public education system. Years ago, we were funding it at roughly 50%. We're now at 30%. And who is suffering are school children in many cases and property taxpayers, because it has only forced locals to drive up property tax rates. So we need to continue on our trajectory of restoring the $1 billion in cuts under former Governor Tom Corbett, and that will be certainly one of the front and most important battle lines come this budget year.
Thank you. Yes, so your third of 4 rebuttals.
You only get 4? Wow. One of the things, there's 2 drivers, really, 2 big drivers in the school district funds, necessity for funds, and that's the pensions, which we talked a little bit about. But the other thing is unfunded mandates. Frank Farina was a rep here, and he passed a law that said all of our teachers should have a course or an education in suicide prevention. Many of us have been touched by that. I would not vote for anything that's an unfunded mandate on our schools.
Thank you. So we're going to talk a little bit about state revenue sources in general. So all state governments are seeking new revenue sources as fiscal stress has become the normal state of government budgets. Some additional revenue sources that we hear discussed in Pennsylvania include a severance or extraction tax on removal of natural gas by for-profit companies, legalizing, regulating, and taxing recreational marijuana, closing the Delaware loophole that allows corporations conducting business in Pennsylvania not to be required to pay Pennsylvania corporate income taxes, leasing state park lands to profit-making fracking companies. So these are just some things that have been talked about to raise more revenue. Mr. Mullins, what new revenue sources would you turn to in order to raise more revenue for the state budget?
I'll go in order, actually, from the menu as best as I can. I am a firm believer that we should be compensated for the resource of natural gas coming out from under our ground. We should not do it in a way that would stifle or drive away the industry, but rather we should do it in a market-sensitive, price-sensitive way, actually very akin to what was near passage, one vote away from passage in the House this last year. So I hope we are that close, if not closer, when we resume the budget and shale tax conversations this coming year. I also believe that our corporate net income tax rate is too high. It is not competitive with surrounding states, and I believe drives other businesses to invest and locate in other states because of it. I would be in favor of a phased reduction from the 9.99% down to 6.99% over a 6-year horizon. And in that time, phase in combined reporting, which is closing the Delaware loophole, making sure that companies doing business here who set up shale corporations in Delaware are paying their fair share of the corporate net income tax rate in Pennsylvania. I believe these are things we could be doing to, these are tax fairness issues, and these are things we should prioritize right away.
Thank you. Mr. Lemoncelli, the same question to you. So what new revenue sources would you turn to in order to raise more revenue for the state budget?
Pennsylvania is not a very business-friendly state. We have, as my opponent said, a 9.99% income tax for corporations. And always severance tax is battered around that we should tax the resource coming out of the ground. Let me tell you what, the governor wants to add the severance tax on top of the tax we already have, which is going to the counties locally and to all counties in the state. That's controlled here locally. The severance tax would go to Harrisburg, and it would be used for political gain. I'm pretty sure of that. So we would see very little help there. And the other part of that is that this is an industry that has brought $2.1 billion so far in additional revenue to the state in the way of services, hotels, and generally the economy increasing because of the industry there. Increasing that tax will cost us, all of us, more, because if your house is heated with gas, that price is going to be passed on to you. Your food is going to be more expensive because the farmers are going to have more expense. As far as recreational marijuana, I don't know that that's a good solution for us. Medical is fine, and decriminalization of that will help our budget with the jails and incarceration. I think we need to cut costs in many places, but I don't think severance taxes are our way out.
Thank you. We'll turn now to the Keystone landfill. Mr. Lemoncelli, you'll answer this question first. In a debate on October 11th, hosted by Citizens for a Healthy Jessup, you each unequivocally stated that you were opposed to the Keystone Sanitary Landfill's proposed expansion. What can you share with us the specific reasons for your opposition to the expansion? Mr. Lemoncelli.
I'd like to bring business into this area. And when you bring businesses in, or you're trying to bring businesses in, you highlight all of the benefits of the area. And we have a lot of benefits. We have great people. We have a strong work ethic. And then they drive down the highway and they smell that dump. First of all, it's too close to our population. There's back and forth about the health issues, and you know, I can't prove it, but boy, I'll tell you what, you all know living close to a dump like that's not good for you. There's things you can prove, and there's things you know. I think again though, it's a big part of the financial picture here. Troop, for instance, I think 80% of their budget comes from landfill dumping fees. it's something, if it was closed, they would have a problem. So maybe the state needs to step in and formulate some private partnership, public partnership, so that it's not closed in one fell swoop, and we give the owner of the landfill time. For instance, a 10-year end-of-life program would be great. It would allow him to move his capital to other areas and not take a beating on it, but I think the Friends of Lackawanna have a lot of good information against reasons why that dump should be closed and certainly not made any bigger. So that's about it.
Thank you. Mr. Mullins, the same question. What are your specific reasons for your opposition to the expansion?
Sure, we all have to live. We all have to live here, and anything. We all live in the shadow to some degree of this facility, and anything that could have the potential for even acute health effects, which I think is what the last study cited a possibility for, is concern. Should be concern enough. As Mr. Lemoncelli indicated, it's too proximate to population centers, and I share that concern. And while a state rep does not get to necessarily vote on whether it should be expanded or closed, what we should be voting on is increasing our recycling efforts and making sure more classifications of materials are ending up in recycling centers and not in the landfill, thus increasing the life of landfills generally across the state. We should reduce the length of time for expansion permits. We're hearing that there is this, it's a 40-year contemplation or application right now. And we should require baseline and reoccurring health and environmental tests to let us know what we're dealing with.
Thank you. The next question stays with environmental concerns. Mr. Mullins will answer first. A 2014 report by the Pennsylvania Department of Health found that children in Scranton and 17 other cities in Pennsylvania tested positive for lead at higher levels than children in Flint, Michigan. The damaging neurological effects of lead exposure, particularly among children, have been well documented in medical literature. So how should the General Assembly help tackle the challenges of identifying and paying to replace water service lines and well pumps containing lead across the state? Mr. Mullins.
The health and welfare of our school children should be priority for any government, local, state, or federal. I believe at the state level, we, without doubt, should pass. There was a number of lead package bills. The most important of which, of course, was dedicating more funding to lead remediation. This gets to a larger conversation that we need to have not only at the state level, but also with our federal partners in Congress. This speaks to our aging infrastructure and the need for these potentially very harmful and deadly pipes to be replaced as quickly as possible.
Thank you. Mr. Lemoncelli, the same question to you. How should the General Assembly tackle the challenges of identifying and paying to replace water service lines and well pumps containing lead across the state?
Well, again, the health and welfare of all of us is in question with that. The Department of Environmental Protection should be more focused on compliance, I think, rather than permitting. If we had a more focused organization that is testing to identify the areas that are more susceptible to lead, then we could formulate plans to get rid of that problem. At this point, though, we've tested the children, or we've tested the people. We haven't tested the facilities, and I think that we need that to be done as a primary function of DEP rather than a secondary. It's the same thing with the power plant in Jessup. They should be monitoring that plant and reporting regularly on any kind of emissions. One of the things that the Citizens for Healthy Jessup did is they've performed baseline studies of the water and air so that once the plant started, there would be something to compare it to. I don't think that should be up to the individuals in the area to do that. I think that's a state function. It's a regional problem and its regional effects. These people raised money to do that, and if they didn't, it would never get done. So we wouldn't know if there was anything to, well, we would know it was bad, but we couldn't prove it. We wouldn't have any baseline. So I think DEP has to be involved in testing and monitoring.
Thank you. The next question, we'll start with Mr. Lemoncelli. Article 1, Section 27 of Pennsylvania Constitution states that the people have a right to clean air, pure water, and to the preservation of the natural, scenic, historic, and aesthetic values of the environment. Pennsylvania's public resources are the common property of all the people, including generations yet to come. As a trustee of these resources, the Commonwealth shall conserve and maintain them for the benefit of all people. So the question is, being a trustee for the environment of Pennsylvania's extraordinary public resources, now and for future generations, is a weighty responsibility. How will you live up to these responsibilities over your coming term in the General Assembly? And we start with Mr. Lemoncelli.
Well, the main question is, again,
How will you, as a legislator,
how will you-
live up to the responsibilities of the Constitution with regard to the environment?
well, the environment, of course, is very important to all of us. We've been in it our whole lives. One of the things that continues to come up again is extraction tax. If we were looking for revenue, if we're trying to protect our resources, then an extraction tax, if it was revenue-based, would be on everything. It would be on timber, it would be on coal, it would be on many of the products that come out of the area, not just fracked wells. I think we have to be smart about what we do, and we have to follow the laws that we have. One of the things that we're supposed to protect is the beauty of the area and the natural resources. I don't think we did a good job here locally with the giant power lines that have come up and down our mountains. And of course, in the past, the coal barons just dug big holes and left them there. So I think there's quite a few laws that we could follow more closely and actually protect our environment that way.
Thank you. The same question to you, Mr. Mullins?
It's great to live in a state and have a chance to represent one that felt it important enough to stick it in its constitution, the protection of those resources. And that is something that we should not lose sight of as we debate these issues of recycling and minimum host standards, which should be in place for power plants. And for the extraction tax, and where and how we permit drilling. It is certainly, we must strike a responsible balance between allowing industry, responsible industry to thrive, but also protecting our God-given environment and the beauty of all we have to offer here in the Lackawanna Valley and in Pennsylvania generally. So what can or should a legislator do to follow specifically that Article 1, Section 27 of the Constitution? When these issues come through committee, when these issues come to the floor for a vote, I would say to myself, does this pass that test? Does this pass that standard? And that should be, I believe that should be a practice by any voting member of either chamber, the House or the Senate.
Thank you. I'm going to turn now to firearms and firearms regulation, and Mr. Mullins will answer first. Many states have passed legislation to regulate firearms, including banning bump stocks, limiting sales of high-capacity magazines, expanding background checks to private firearms sales, placing conditions on concealed handgun permits, and requiring owners to report the loss or theft of a firearm within a reasonable amount of time. What legislative measures do you support to reduce firearm accidents and intentional violence?
Sure. I often say that we are a few years from sending our young son to school, into the public school system for the first time, and I would hope and pray that we experience no more of these school massacres, and that it is only something that he reads about in the absolute worst pages of his history book. I believe in the Second Amendment. I believe in the right to bear a firearm to protect your life and property, or to hunt with. Our guns are safe when we're safe with our gun laws. I believe that we had a recent victory, which was long and drawn out unnecessarily. God knows how many near issues could have happened in the meanwhile, but if you are the subject of a protection from abuse order, up until recently, up until the legislature finally acted, you could leave your firearm in the safekeeping of a friend or relative. Now it must go to law enforcement. I can't believe how long it took to come to agreement on that common sense piece of legislation. Every time a gun gets into the wrong hands, it is whether it be from a straw purchase or from a gun show loophole, with the wrong intention, it infringes on law-abiding citizens' ability to possess that firearm. So I recognize that. It's very important to me. So we should, those who are fearful of the Second Amendment going away, you should fear not, because I believe there's shared incentive to find some safe solutions.
Thank you. Mr. Lemoncelli, the same question to you. What legislative measures do you support to reduce firearm accidents and intentional violence?
Well, we need to do a better job enforcing the gun laws we have now so that we can protect the rights of law-abiding citizens and to bear arms, while still keeping firearms out of the hands of people that shouldn't have them. We always hear of background checks. We have an instant background check in Pennsylvania that costs $6 million a year, and when you buy a weapon or a firearm, you have to pay $5 to get a background check. We're wasting that money. There's a federal instant background check that's free. It's already there. So we're spending $6 million to replicate something that may not be even as good. The second thing is background checks are only as good as the data that you're checking against. There is no database that has all the mental health records in it in this country. It just doesn't exist. So background checks will find if you're a criminal, perhaps, but criminals aren't buying guns from markets or stores. They're buying them from other criminals, or they're stealing them. It was an accepted practice when the Second Amendment was written that people hunted. That wasn't the reason for the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment protects us from a tyrannical government. In World War II, the Japanese did not invade because of all of the firearms that we had here. They said that behind every blade of grass would be an armed enemy. It's unfortunate that there's no way to prevent intentional violence. If someone wants to be violent, they're going to do it either with a gun, a knife, or some other form of weapon. And I don't think law-abiding citizens should be penalized because there are others that break the law.
Thank you. The next question, Mr. Lemoncelli, you will answer first, and this deals with women's health. The September 2018 Franklin and Marshall poll reported that 51% of respondents thought abortion should be legal under certain circumstances. 34% thought abortion should be legal under any circumstances, and 12% responded that abortion should be illegal under all circumstances. Recent efforts in our state legislature have tried to restrict women's right to timely and accessible abortion services. So the question is, if elected, would you support or oppose any restrictions to Pennsylvania women's right to safe and legal abortion?
I don't believe abortion is a very good thing at all. I was first asked about it when I was 13 years old, and I really thought that it was in high school, and I thought these upperclassmen were trying to pull a joke on me. Who would do that kind of thing? No, I don't support abortion. First of all, if you go to our founding documents, it says we have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. You can't pursue happiness if you don't have life. It's a sacred thing. There are far too many U.S. citizens that are not allowed to live, and I think that's wrong. And I would not support opening that up at all.
Thank you. Mr. Mullins, if elected, would you support or oppose any restrictions to Pennsylvania women's right to safe and legal abortion?
Thank you. This is a tough issue for so many, and has divided so many, and it become so much a political issue across our country. In short, I believe this is settled federal case law, and as such, I would not support any additional restrictions in Pennsylvania on those decisions. I believe we should respect the privacy of those decisions between a woman and her doctor. And as the late conservative columnist Charles Krauthammer once said, how can we expect such a question to yield answers that are not tentative and indeterminate? So difficult a moral question should command humility, or at least a little old-fashioned tolerance. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll talk a little bit now about state and local government relations. Mr. Mullins will answer this first. State preemption law establishes state authority over local government authority in a particular area of regulation. For example, the Pennsylvania legislature has attempted to preempt municipal laws regarding firearms in Lancaster and Philly, sale of soda and tobacco in Philly, and use of plastic bags in other localities. Such state preemption typically occurs after lobbying by large, well-funded industries. So the question is, should the Pennsylvania General Assembly preempt local government laws that the local officials perceive to be in their community's best interest? Please explain your answer. Mr. Mullins.
Sure. In my time as a legislative staffer, I've gotten to see how this issue played out, and how different people for different reasons fell on either side of it. In Pennsylvania, they love to talk about local control. We love vesting control with the local governments, until the local government's about to pass something that politicians in Harrisburg and the majority party don't like. So I just think we need to remove we need to figure out which way we want it in our system. Paid family leave, there's no excuse for us in this modern day, in a civilized world, that we don't have a paid family leave policy. And short of having a paid family leave policy at the state level, I certainly believe in a local government's right to implement a respectable amount of time off for for a personal family issue.
Thank you. Mr. Lemoncelli, the same question to you. Should the State General Assembly preempt local government laws that the local officials perceive to be in their community's best interest? Please explain your answer.
Without preemption, you would have a jigsaw puzzle of laws. Take, for instance, firearms. If Scranton outlawed concealed carry and Jessup didn't, the man going from Jessup to Scranton would be breaking the law if he had a state license. to carry that firearm. You mentioned soda, plastic bags. I mean, how much do we need the government to do for us? We don't need, the less government we have telling us what to do, I think the better off we are. Personal leave, sounds like an unfunded mandate to me. Yeah, we're going to have personal leave. Who's going to pay for that? The businesses? You mean the same ones who are going to double their pay to $15 an hour? They're going to absorb that? I really think state preemption is a valid vehicle to keep things organized, and I would support that.
Thank you. We're going to turn now to criminal justice reform, and Mr. Lemoncelli will answer this first. The League of Women Voters of Pennsylvania supports ban the box legislation to remove the conviction question from job applications as recommended by the National Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. The League of Women Voters of Pennsylvania also supports ban the box legislation to remove the conviction question on public housing applications, with the exceptions for registered sex offenders and individuals convicted of manufacturing or possessing controlled substances in public housing facilities. So please state and explain your position on ban the box legislation. Mr. Lemoncelli.
In many cases, people that are incarcerated deserve a second chance. And I think ban the box has a valid reason to be. You have exceptions, however, for sex offenders and what was the other?
Individuals convicted of manufacturing or processing controlled substances in public housing facilities.
So it's only in public housing facilities. If you did it in a private place, it's okay.
At this point,
This- well, I
yes,
mean-
because most people are talking about specific rules limiting people who
I
live in
understand.
public housing.
I understand.
And they can be kicked out in a way that private housing can't.
Right, I understand. Yeah, I think we need to give everybody a second chance. I do. There's an organization here in town that he and I were both at a number of months ago. The person that's incarcerated, it's not the only person that's affected. They may have children. They have family. And they need to get a break once in a while. Many times they're not highly educated, and they need to get into an organization that helps them. I think ban the box is probably a good thing to do.
Thank you. Same question to you, Mr. Mullins.
Thank you very much. I certainly agree with my opponent here, and certainly thought back on our time at the ELTC, where there's some real success stories with people getting a second chance at life outside of the criminal justice system to reunite with their families and to learn how to be a good father or mother again. With adequate protections, I absolutely would support ban the box legislation. It's been a piece of legislation that has stalled for too long in the legislature, and I think it's time we move on that. As you mentioned, we certainly have a prison population problem, and with a cycle of unemployment comes often the reversion to a life of crime. So I believe a certain profile of ex-offender should absolutely get a second chance and have that box removed in their applications to remove that stigma that they face.
Thank you. And so now we want to talk a little bit about victim justice reform. And this will be answered by Mr. Mullins first. In the last legislative session, a bill to change the statute of limitation for lawsuits regarding child sexual abuse was proposed and died. Current state law allows childhood sexual abuse survivors to file lawsuits up until they turn 30 years old. The reform would have changed the age to 50 years old. So please state and explain your position on changing the statute of limitations for childhood sexual abuse lawsuits.
As I mentioned before, it was certainly one of the most shameful displays and lack of action possible by the Republican-dominated state Senate before they left town. We are all shocked and horrified by the findings of the grand jury report. And the very least and most urgent thing we can do and should be doing is providing healing for these victims. These crimes, these experiences are going to stay with these victims for the rest of their lives. So Harrisburg should act immediately, without delay, upon its return to session in 2019, and follow all of the Attorney General's recommendations of eliminating the statute of limitations, providing a 2-year window to victims to be able to sue their abusers. We need to clarify who is required to report a crime, and that no non-disclosure agreements signed should prevent victims from being able to go to the police to report their crimes. So this is something that should not wait, and we should get on it as quickly as we could.
Thank you. Mr. Lemoncelli, the same question.
I read the summary in the grand jury report, and it's astounding. I can't imagine even a horror writer coming up with something that heinous. I think the statute of limitations should be opened up completely. There is nothing more personal than that kind of violation, and I think anyone that has been violated that way should have the opportunity to address it in the court of law, and I don't think there should be a limitation at all on that.
Thank you. I think we have time for one last question. Maybe we will just go with 1 minute for the answers. So the question is, and this will go to Mr. Lemoncelli first. If elected, after serving in the General Assembly, what is the one achievement you would hope to be remembered for?
I don't know if there's one achievement I would hope to be remembered for. I think I'd like to be remembered as someone who stood for the people of this district, and not for the party and not for special interests, but did the right thing by the people here, did what we needed to get done, not what some other organization or other place needed to get done. I'd like to be remembered as nicely as Sid Kavulich was remembered.
Thank you. Mr. Mullins, the same question to you.
It's a tough one. If the passing of Sid Kavulich, as my opponent mentioned, teaches us anything, we have a choice to do on this earth. We have many choices with what to do with our time on earth, and it should be dedicated toward serving people. I've always believed in public service and its value and how it should touch everyone's life in some form or another. So we should never be doing things on this earth to be remembered. Statues and old black and white photos should teach us that we got to do what we have with our little time here on earth. And that should be to just be remembered as someone who went to work, never forgot who they were serving, was responsive to his or her constituents, and always followed his or her heart and conscience in Harrisburg and back here in the district.
Thank you. And so now we will move to closing statements, and Mr. Mullins will give us his closing statement first. Mr. Mullins. 2 minutes, yes, I'm sorry, 2 minutes for the closing statement. You can use less.
Thank you again to the League of Women Voters, and to my supporters, my family, and my wife, who provide me such inspiration to keep going every day, knocking the doors, and getting out there and meeting voters and hearing their concerns. You drive me every day. I thank Mr. Lemoncelli's supporters as well for playing an important role in this process. Being active and engaged citizens is so critically important on both sides of the aisle. And I, of course, thank my friend, Mr. Lemoncelli, for agreeing to not one but two debates. This is certainly a humbling experience running for office. It's an experience that I've put myself and my family through because I believe in our community. I always have, and I always will. It's a community I'm so proud to have been raised in, and I'm working, and I'd like to work so hard to improve it. We have so much to be proud of in this community, but we still have a lot of work to do to create jobs, to create fairer tax policies for our citizens, especially for our seniors. Women and families deserve a champion in Harrisburg, and they need to know that they are down there fighting for them. We must strengthen programs that benefit our older Pennsylvanians, our veterans, and those suffering with opioid abuse and addiction. And I certainly believe it's high time to pass the government reforms that finally put the taxpayers first once again. So I believe voters have a right to the government as good as the people it should be serving. It's something I pledge to always remember. I pledge to work every single day to move this district forward, not backward. And I humbly ask for your support and your vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Mullins. Mr. Lemoncelli.
This election is
Microphone, please.
This election is not a popularity contest, and it's not a sporting event between two teams. And one look at the two of us, you'll know it's not a beauty contest. The question you must answer is which candidate can best represent your interests in Harrisburg and not those of special interests or Harrisburg insiders. Your choice is between a candidate who's had a successful career in the private sector or a candidate with only Harrisburg bureaucratic experience. Between a candidate that has accepted no special interest money or one that has. I will honestly, professionally, and intensely represent your interests and the interests of this district with class. I do not seek another career or to be a lifer in Harrisburg. I will represent your interests and not those of the party or special interests. I'll do what needs to be done for the betterment of all of the people of the 112th district. As a member of the majority party in Harrisburg, I will be more capable of bringing benefits to our area because I will have a seat at the table. It's time for real change in the 112th district. Send a representative to Harrisburg who has real-world experience and is beholden to no one except you. I ask for your vote on November 6th. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lemoncelli. So I would like to thank all of you for joining us this evening, including our two candidates. We, the League of Women Voters of Lackawanna County and the Political Science Department at the University of Scranton, hope that this event has been educational for all of you and useful for when you go out and vote on November 6th. So please do remember to vote on November 6th. Thank you.